Thank you. I paid my money to come here and listen. I didn't expect to be standing here talking to you, but I've never refused an opportunity to talk, so I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with me. I drew the short straw because Bill Murphy said to me, we need somebody to tell us why the analysts community takes no notice of what we've been producing and what other people have been producing. We just get a series of stifled yawns. And so I've got this sharp spear in my back. I thought of a few ideas, but I'd like to just recall the story of Nathan Rothschild. You probably all remember it. But it's about knowledge as power and knowledge as profit. And this goes back to 1815, at the time of the Battle of Waterloo. And Nathan Rothschild was in charge of Rothschild's Bank in London. And he knew that if the French won, British bonds were going to tank. And if the British won, they'd go up. Now, the Rothschilds' empire was well versed in this idea that knowledge is power, and they developed a whole structure of couriers across Europe. They could get messages right across Europe much quicker than anybody else could. They knew that if they had the right information ahead of others, they could make money. So, as it happened, Nathan was sitting at his desk at the Bourse, at the stock exchange, waiting for his courier to arrive. And he duly arrived about a day ahead of the official courier from the Duke of Wellington. And he had this knowledge that the British had won. And he sat there looking glum and sombre, and then he started selling. And the cry went up, "Nathan's selling." And the bonds tanked. And then Nathan stepped in, obviously with the big bucket, and started buying. And they reaped a fortune overnight. I don't know how you would fare in today's regulatory environment, but in those days they made a lot of money. It was a classic example of early knowledge was powerful and profitable, and it's also an indication that manipulation was alive and well then. And another thing that I think needs to be drawn from this particular story is that manipulation cannot last forever against the primary trend. It can happen for a short while, or maybe even in the medium term, but eventually the facts involved in the primary trend will overwhelm the manipulators. He only had one day, and he knew it, and he took advantage of it. Right, we come to Bill's request for reasons why the analysts are not taking notice of what's happening. I could think of maybe half a dozen reasons. I had to scratch my brain a little bit. Number one, I think there's a very low tolerance of anything that sounds like a conspiracy theory. You get a negative reaction straight away. Analysts like transparency, they like clear-cut facts and figures. They don't like confusion. Second thing, manipulation has been around forever, as I've just explained with Nathan. Governments manipulate everything from the price indices to the reasons for going to war, to markets, you name it. As analysts, you get used to manipulation. You've got to factor it into what you do. It's part of life. And if you know what's going on, you can profit from it. So manipulation is nothing new. The third thing, manipulation of the gold price. You don't need a conspiracy theory to know that the gold price is manipulated. The central banks have said we're selling gold. Now, they're either stupid or they've got a good reason. I don't think they're stupid. So what's the good reason? And the good reason is that they want to prolong the longevity of the irredeemable bits of paper that they issue as money. Simple as that. Fourth reason. Gold, and it used to be silver as well, is produced for accumulation and not consumption. It's unique in that way. Silver used to be, but it's developed into an industrial metal. It's now used up, the stockpiles are used up. And the reason why this metal is produced for accumulation and not consumption is that over time it retains its value. And historically, through the millennia, people of wealth, when times of trouble emerged, that's how they preserved their wealth, was through gold. Nothing has changed. That still pertains. But when an analyst looks at this situation, he says 90% of the world's gold is still there. So, okay, some people are selling, but what's the reason to get involved? And that brings us to the fifth reason, which I think is possibly the most important one. And that is, most of the analysts today are young. Sadly, we all get older and they drag us off and, into the rocking chairs. But the young analysts, as Ferdy mentioned in his talk today, are not taught monetary history. They're not taught what gold is, what the attributes of gold are. They totally have no idea. My kids don't know. I talk to my young stockbrokers in Sydney or London. They have no idea. They've got no concept of what gold is. There's a huge education problem out there. And the fact that it's so widespread says to me that we've got a major opportunity out there. The people who have knowledge, as I think we have here, have got a fantastic opportunity to benefit from this. There's possibly a final reason, but it's more an observation, and that is that when you talk of manipulation of gold, you're really looking at the negative side of things. And like all coins, you have an obverse. And the obverse side is that there's a good story. And it's the good story that I think that GATA should be telling. Now, if we could imagine that we today could intercept a courier that's coming from the financial war front, and it's going to his master with a piece of information which we happen to know contains the secret of the most important investment factor that's going to influence us over the next several years, and we managed to intercept it. What do you think that piece of information might be? I would venture to suggest that it might be something like the US dollar is not going to exist in 5 years' time. Now, it may be 3 years, it may be 8 years, but somewhere in the foreseeable future, I think it's going to happen. And the reason why I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later is that the problems that beset the American economy are imminent, they're coming to a head, and they all seem to start with the letter D. There are deficits, there's debt, there's the dollar. I knew I'd lose some of these. Demographics, derivatives, devaluations, deflation, and finally, the latest D is dwellings, as in real estate. All of these things are going to come to a head. All of them are going to have money thrown at them. All of the money is going to come from the electronic printing press, and I think we're facing a situation where this whole money creation situation is going to go exponential. It only took 4 years, from 1919 to 1923, for the Germans to wipe out the Reichsmark. And they didn't have an electronic printing press. I think this is the most serious problem facing the investment community, in fact everybody on the planet, because we're all going to be affected by it. And I think that's where the focus should be. Anyway, I'll revert back to GATA, if I may, because I'd just like to say a few words on what I think GATA should do, and I think that's part of the reason you wanted me to speak. I'm sorry to say, guys, but I don't like the name. I think it's a negative sounding name. Gold, antitrust, action. I mean, what on earth is this? You've got to change it to something that's more positive. It's got to be something that has gold in the name. I think that's important. But it's got to give an idea of something better. Gold Restructure Committee, or Gold Resurrection Council, or as Ferdy was suggesting this morning, the Gold Monetary Institute. Any of these things. But I think that's the first step. Then the second step is to produce a manifesto. You've got to pay less attention to the manipulations. You've got to pay more attention to solving the education problem, teaching people what's going on. And then, thirdly, if you can convince the media that there's a problem up ahead, that the dollar's going to disappear, it affects everybody. They can't ignore it. They can't ignore it. Secondly, when you go to the mining companies and you say, this is what we're planning to do, we're going to have a monetary institute, we're going to educate people about gold and gold as money. How about giving us the money that you give to the World Gold Council? If you get half of them, you've got 30 million bucks in your budget. That's a pretty nice start. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'll just leave you with those at this point.